sports are really important vehicles for relationships.
We have purpose. We have a why. We bring people together. We connect.
I feel like God is our greatest supporter and our greatest coach.
Welcome to Rabbi on the Sidelines. This is Rabbi Sherman from Sinai Temple in Los Angeles. This week we are joined by a voice that we know you have heard. I was just talking to him off the air. I sounded like I was sitting in the amazing Yankee Stadium. So many games that I experienced when I was in rabbinical school and at Columbia University. We are joined by Paul Olden, voice of the New York Yankees, a longtime Angelino during his career, the voice and PA announcer of 12 Super Bowls, also known as the voice of God. Paul, it's so great to have you. Thanks for joining us today.
Oh, you're welcome. Don't forget I did PA at USC baseball for many seasons, too.
Oh, yes, and we are a divided congregation here with the Bruins and the Trojans, so we want to make sure we include all in our efforts to reach the sports world. So,
well, you can leave the Bruins out. Although I did UCLA football and basketball too, so I'm on both sides as well.
Both sides of the aisle. That's how we try for it. So, Paul, I actually had a chance to meet you in person a couple of months ago in Southern California at the Skirball Center for the Southern California Jewish Sports Hall of Fame. Who were you there to honor that night?
Well, my friend Ted Sobel, with whom I went to Los Angeles City College together in the early 70s. And then he became a longtime sportscaster there in LA, KFWB, among other places, for many years. And he was being honored that night, being inducted.
And maybe tell a little bit of your thoughts of what that evening was like and why it is important to have specifically a sports Hall of Fame that is dedicated to people's own faith as well.
Well, I think for Ted, just being recognized for his achievements, sometimes people get overlooked for various reasons, but to be honored by your own, so to speak, underscores the value of making the effort to be out front and representative. So I think that was important for Ted. And, we knew many of the people for whom they were being inducted. And Fred Rogan was the host. And of course, we watched him on television many years there in Los Angeles, and know Fred from just seeing him at games and talking to him. He did a great job as the host, and seeing the young people get inducted and involved and make some made impassioned speeches. Others kept their speeches pretty short.
I know there was a time limit, but they didn't really adhere to that.
Yeah. You get up there once you start thinking of people that you didn't write down to thank, or you remember somebody that you didn't. As Ted did that night, he got permission to go back up on stage and thank some people that he'd forgotten. So it was a nice way to cap off a visit to Southern California. I get back a couple times a year, Christmas and usually during the baseball season. And it's always kind of centered around sports.
So I actually talk about the Yankees for a moment. Somebody who's going to be sitting in the booth next to you is Dave Sims, one of my first guests on the Rabbi on the Sidelines podcast. Talk about what that means for Dave Sims to come back home and be the voice of the New York Yankees now.
Well, it's always great to be able to go back to the place where you kind of established yourself. I did that in Los Angeles in the early 90s when I was in Cleveland, and I got a chance to come back to broadcast the Rams and UCLA and do a talk show there at KMPC, a station that I grew up listening to. So that was always something that happens quite a bit here in New York. Many of the New York broadcasters have gone to school in New York, grew up in New York, were fans of the team in New York, which makes it even more unusual for me, a Southern Californian, to be kind of brought into the fraternity of sportscasters broadcasting New York sports. And I was accepted as an outsider from the beginning. Wasn't really criticized. I had gotten some coverage in New York before I even got hired there by Bob Raisman of the New York Daily News, did a column on me when I was at ESPN. And said, well, this is a guy that who's an up and comer, and wouldn't it be great if he was here in New York? And next thing you know, a couple of years later, I was there in New York.
And
But
so,
to be able to come back and for Dave to be involved again at such a high profile job, it's great for him.
it's interesting because you've been in many different aspects of the broadcasting world, and there was you said in a clip that I was watching the other night that you have it easy. You just have to read a script. What's the difference or the most challenging piece of only reading a script that you have to innovate in order to be a PA announcer? Because in the stadium, you're giving the fans that experience while the broadcast the play-by-play is doing for the outside audience. What is the relationship between the PA announcer and the fans?
Just to keep the fans involved and know what's going on. Major League Baseball put a memo out a few years ago saying that we had to explain things, that naughty rule interpretations. But we don't do that so much now because the umpires
Yeah, they
or
have the mic.
the crew chief wears a microphone. But even with that, there have been several times in the past couple of seasons where we thought they were going to explain something to the fans. They should have and didn't. And so I'm sure that's been mentioned during the off season this year for the umpires to do a little bit more explaining. We had a situation, I think, in the World Series where the umpires stopped play and all four of them met together next to the mound for like 2 minutes and then resumed play and didn't explain what was going on. So we were all wondering, well, what was that all about? And people on TV were saying the same thing. We can't figure out why they were meeting, and they chose not to explain it to us. So it's just keeping the fans informed, keeping the atmosphere light, especially when the Yankees are coming up, or Aaron Judge or Juan Soto. Let's hope he comes up again for the Yankees. I haven't seen the news today. He hasn't signed anywhere, has he?
Not as of this recording, but we're always making history here on Rabbi on the Sidelines, so we'll never know.
yeah. I was going to look that up while I was sitting here.
Actually, I had Jeff Passan on here a couple years ago, and it was the day that Freddie Freeman signed with the Dodgers. So it was a pretty amazing moment here.
Freddie who?
Freddie who?
That guy?
So the PA announcer is also known as the VOG, the voice of God. And I grew up when I was in New York. It was the Bob Shepard years, and you talk about how Bob said you don't do anything out of the box. I have in my mind number 2, Derek Jeter. How do you replace a guy, a legend like that? And I remember seeing also a clip where you sort of brought Bob's voice back to the stadium so the fans remember him. What's the relationship?
Well,
with Bob
they did that during the World Series when he threw out the first pitch. I did the first part of the intro, and then they used the tape of him saying Derek Jeter number 2 for the last part before he came out and threw the first pitch. So we always like to bring Bob's voice back to the stadium, and we do it every year at Old Timers Day.
I love that day.
They have a tape where they are able to run for him to introduce the Old Timers Day festivities. So yeah, I don't really see it as replacing him. I followed Bob, and I knew him very well, so it wasn't like I was replacing someone who I didn't know. And so being able to sit down with Bob several times at the old Yankee Stadium for pregame dinner and get to know him and him get to know me, that helped quite a bit in the transition.
And is there a difference? Obviously, you're doing the same lineup, whether it's a preseason game, a regular season game, NLC or ALCS, or even World Series. But is there a difference in that? In Hebrew, we call it kavanah, the intent, the energy. What is that difference in terms of making that voice in the specific moment as opposed to just reading that script?
Well, you try not to separate the games in terms of importance. Obviously, a World Series game is different from a routine spring training game, but the rudiments are exactly the same. You have to pronounce the names correctly, get out of the way of the action, and not make any mistakes.
Not make any mistakes.
Yeah, not make any mistakes. or say anything inappropriate. Excuse me.
So it's interesting that you say not make any mistakes, because baseball is a game of mistakes where the best players, try to hit 300 and it's a failing grade on a test. So where do you see that idea of baseball being a game of mistakes while your job being a game of not making mistakes?
Well, I mean, that shows you how difficult baseball is if you can fail 7 out of 10 times and still get $50 million a year. With the PA, our hit rate is a little bit higher. If I can end the night by saying, I go into the game saying I'm going to try and talk a perfect game tonight, not make any mistakes, not stumble over any other things in the script or mispronounce a name. There was one national anthem singer a few years ago, a Broadway actor, who sang, and then a couple of years later they invited him back. And so I was a little hazy on the pronunciation of his name. So I went back on YouTube and saw an interview with him. And he said, I sang the national anthem at Yankee Stadium, and the PA guy mispronounced my name.
Oh,
And that was that night. So I didn't know about it for 2 years. So I made sure I got the name right the next time he was there. But sometimes you just don't know. And other people don't know that you made a mistake because they don't know either. I always try to say I make my mistakes sound like they're supposed to be said the way I said them.
I love that, and that actually I think is part of the faith aspects where I love combining these two worlds. That life is about making mistakes, and it's about how you create the mistakes as part of your life, and not actually as the highlight of the game as well.
Now, I read something last night. A TV producer was saying, this is years ago, that he'll pay anybody $500 for the worst idea that at least you tried. So at the end of the production season, he got his staff together and said, well, this was the worst idea that we gave a shot for. And here's the $500 goes to Joe or Mary for at least trying something out of the box, at least trying to innovate. And that's how you do kind of grow and innovate, by trying things that may or may not work, but you don't know until you try.
That's so true. That might be the sermon of the week. You don't know until you try. And take us to a different sport, which I know you've done 12 Super Bowls. What's that pressure of perfection look like? And what's the difference between, PA and football, when a lot of quick action, you got to find out what yard line they're getting tackled on, where they're starting, the penalties, as opposed to baseball, where it's a bit more drawn out, perhaps a bit more relaxed for the fan experience?
Well, at least in football, we don't have to explain the penalties. They come in right away. I do. I like to say that I'm an aggressive PA announcer with football, because many PA announcers, like for instance, if the ball is handed off to a running back, they'll wait until the play is over to say the running back's name, carry the ball. Emmitt Smith carried the ball.
Mm-hmm.
Well, I always believed the fellow that I listened to when I was growing up in LA, John Ramsey, did PA for all the teams there in Southern California. But he was the type that would say, as soon as the ball is handed to Emmitt Smith, he would say, Emmitt Smith is the ball carrier, not was,
wow,
as opposed to after the play is engaged and he's tackled. Most PA announcers would say Emmitt Smith was the ball carrier. So I like to say, I like to be right on top of things. As soon as I know who the running back is, and as soon as I see him get the ball, and I'll say his name on the carry, because the fans are sitting there in the stands wondering who that is, especially in college, because a lot of players are rotated in and out, quarterbacks and running backs on every other play. And fans aren't paying that close attention to what the coaches are doing with their personnel on the field. So I like to make sure that they know who it is exactly when they touch the ball.
That's fascinating. And also another philosophical idea about the was versus is, that to be actually in the moment and take the consumer, the fan, the person, if you wish, in my business, in the pews, to make sure that they're living in that moment as well. And what about the innovation? It's not just about the script, but some, PA announcers have their own calls. When I grew up in Syracuse, New York. Carl Eilenberg was my basketball and football PA announcer. The travels are always, he traveled. How do you find that moment of, voice inflection to make it like, oh, that is Paul Olden and not just a person at a microphone?
Well, you try not to be too, you don't want to single yourself out because you're not the game. But I always like when I introduce when I say, and good evening, everybody, and welcome to Yankee Stadium, I always pause for, because Yankee Stadium is a special place.
Mhm.
And so I would say, good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to pause Yankee Stadium. And at the beginning, the fans didn't really know what to do, but they caught on that that's that pause after Yankee Stadium is their applause line.
Oh,
So
nice.
that's where they're supposed to go nuts and cheer that they're at Yankee Stadium. So in subsequent years, the fans have caught on, and so when I do that now, it gets a nice when they're Yankee fans in the stadium. I'll explain that in a second. When there are Yankee fans in the stadium, I get a good reaction. But sometimes in the middle of May on a Tuesday night when it's cold and uh, a lot of tourists get tickets to come to the stadium and they don't know that that's when they're supposed to cheer. So
Uh-huh.
you can tell when there's quote unquote a Yankee crowd in the stadium and if it's a tourist crowd by the reaction when I open the mic to say, "Good evening, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to Yankee Stadium." If there's not a big rousing reaction, then it's a
They're from
tourist crowd
Boston.
tonight. A tourist crowd tonight. So you
I
try to
think
have fun with it, but try not to underscore your presence over the game itself.
I
At
think
least
I need
that's
to
for me.
Yeah, I think we need to work with you at Sinai Temple here because, like, the welcome to Sinai Temple or that special Shabbat Shalom that we get
Yeah,
because it's true because you don't get another first impression to make another first impression. And
yeah,
so those literal words of how you welcome people into your house is crucial in terms of making them feel included in what's about to happen.
yes, yes.
That's
I agree.
amazing.
I agree.
Have you been involved with any historical moments during a game that you had to announce? I spoke with Dan Schulman a couple of years ago when he on TV had to announce that Osama bin Laden was killed, or somebody who was a broadcaster during the Gulf War. Have there been any? Or actually, I was in Yankee Stadium in the bleachers, in fact, during college, right after 9/11, when George Bush launched the attack back on Iraq. Have there been any of those moments where you've had to done something outside of the sports realm to announce to the community of sports fans what was happening in the outside world?
No, not really. No, we usually don't interrupt a game with something that is not game related, even if it happens during the game. Like if someone, like for instance, earlier uh, uh, when Willie Mays passed, it was announced
Mhm.
that Willie Mays had died. I asked our producer, I said, "Mike, are we going to say anything during the game?" But that's not. We don't normally do that. We did a moment of silence, of course, the next day.
Right.
And I think the Yankees believe that's better done in a pregame ceremony than interrupting a game and perhaps casting a pall over the stadium
Mhm.
if I had to announce some prominent person's death.
Mhm.
So we pretty much keep it uh, to ourselves, even if we know something happened during the game. Now,
Interesting.
having said that, we do have a script prepared for me to read in case something cataclysmic happens
Right.
outside the stadium and that it leads to the game being postponed or suspended.
Mhm.
But thankfully, nothing like that has happened yet.
Wow. Thank God. And
Yeah.
it's interesting because there's a dichotomy when I speak to people in the sports world about, is sports a distraction from the world or is it sort of part of the ecosystem of what we're actually all doing together? I need your take as an Angelino who does a PA announcing for the Yankees of the Dodgers Yankees that we just witnessed. Let's hear that.
Well, I mean, it prevented me from wearing my Dodger cap during the World Series, which I normally do if the Yankees aren't involved and the Dodgers are.
Uh-huh.
So, but yeah, it was good to see a lot of friends come back east to be at the stadium. And a lot of people I know, like I said, my uh, public address colleague Todd Lights, he and I worked at KNX Radio during news and
Oh, so
sport
nice.
together when I had a break from baseball in 2005 to 2009. So I always go out and visit with Todd, and he'd be a great guest to have. Have you had him on yet? Todd
Not
Light?
yet, but Rabbi on the Sidelines is a podcast of possibilities, so I look
Yeah,
forward to
yeah.
connecting with him as well.
Well, Todd is a very accomplished musician and singer. And he had actually sung the national anthem at Fenway Park many times
Oh,
because
no
he's a
way.
Boston guy. At Fenway Park and Dodger Stadium and down in San Diego many years before he got the Dodgers PA job. And I think he has sung the national anthem where he had to introduce himself. Now
No.
I'm singing the national anthem. And of course, he's a trained, I think he's a trained operatic singer.
Oh my
Uh,
gosh, that's so
so he
amazing.
has quite the voice. So he'd make a great guest. And he's been involved in the Dodgers, I think, now for 9 years. Also has been involved and still is with the LA Fire Department in terms of
Oh,
functions with the fire department. So he'd be a good Southern California guest to have on.
would love to connect. So, two last questions. The first is a faith question. Do you see any faith within the sports world, the baseball world? When I talked to Dave Sims, actually, he said, like, when people say, I thank God, right, that I hit the home run, well, the left fielder is not saying, I thank God that the guy over Dodger Stadium picked the ball out of my glove from Mookie Betts and did that. Any faith aspects that you've seen over your time in the sports world that you saw of significance?
Not really. I think the thing that stands out for me is that we had a church here in St. Petersburg that put out that had a big sign on the front lawn outside the church, and they changed the little missive that they put in the sign holder each day,
Hmm.
and I think the one that I'm thinking of said, "God doesn't care which team wins."
That is very true. I think.
So because you see guys after games, men
Mhm.
and women thanking a higher power for their win, but that suggests that the higher power was against the other team, uh, and they have players on that team praying just as hard. Uh, so you understand where it's coming from, but
Yeah, no, for
you
sure.
don't take it literally.
Yeah, no, I think the best aspects of faith that I have seen is the higher power allowing you to play the game and
Yeah,
not necessarily creating the result, but
yeah,
dealing with the result, whatever that result is.
yeah.
Um, yes, so no, it's true, it's true. And just love maybe your favorite Yankee call that you could share with us that really encourages you to get back to the box office and do it every single day.
Well, I think just being able to sit in that chair, I'll be going into my 17th year
Wow.
this season, and to be able to hold on to a position that long in any aspect of your profession is a miracle.
Yes. Yes.
Just so being able to be involved in baseball, I'll be 71 next year, and being at the top of the sport still at this age. When you look back at a lot of people have faded away and are no longer involved in the game. Sometimes at their own behest, other times not. So just to be able to walk out of the door and go to Yankee Stadium and sit down and do that job
Hmm.
is something that I don't take for granted.
And what's their relationship with the players? I know we talked about the fans, but what do they want out of what you're doing? Are they giving you suggestions in sort of how to bring them up into the moment that they have to be in?
No, I kind of take the Vin Scully aspect of dealing with players. I don't really have that much contact with them. Uh,
Interesting.
I don't have to travel with the team, so I don't. It's not like we're on the same plane or staying in the same hotel. I just have to pronounce their name correctly. That's all they ask.
Yes.
I have friends who from my minor league days who are still involved in the game. So I go visit with them. But the Major League Baseball does a great job. They put out a pronunciation guide each
Nice.
year. Each team now has its own pronunciation guide and their daily notes that we get. And there's always YouTube to go on and to hear the announcers say the name of a player, or in fact have the player say their own name during interviews.
Oh, nice.
So it's fairly easy to get the names right, and so there's no excuse for getting the names wrong because there's so many avenues to make sure that you say the name correctly.
That's actually exactly what a rabbi that I worked with said, that the one thing you cannot do as a rabbi is say a name incorrectly, because everything else will come together. It's about
Yes.
people. It's about welcoming people into our house. It's about welcoming your people into the house that Ruth built, and my people and our people in the faith business into the house that God built, and that's all of us.
Yeah.
Paul Olden, it is so wonderful to host you here, to actually see your face as opposed to hearing your voice, for so many memories that you have created in my own life and the millions and millions of people that are affected by what you do every single day. Thank you so much, and we look forward to seeing you soon when you're out in LA.
All right. I'll be out there next May. The Yankees travel to LA next year for the rematch of the World Series.
Yes.
I always put that in quotation marks because any regular season matchup between two teams that have been involved in a championship game, it's not a rematch. It's just the regular season game. But it'll be fun to see the Dodgers and Yankees play once again at Dodger Stadium, where the stakes aren't so high.
That is true. That is true. Paul Olden, Rabbi on the Sidelines. Paul Olden, the PA announcer, voice of the New York Yankees, voice of 12 Super Bowls, and just a wonderful, wonderful friend of Rabbi on the Sidelines. God bless, and thank you so much, Paul. Have a great day.
You're welcome. Bye-bye.